Okay, so last week's video, that was all, of course, about building that machine there. Well, my 3900X based build on Big Sky. Now, what today is really all going to be about is talking about, of course, the 3900X itself. And on top of talking about this, talk about how it really performs, considering that due to my limitations in cooling, I'm actually running this thing on eco mode. Now, of course, most of you are probably thinking, why would you need to run on eco mode? You're running on a RAD like that. Well, for most things, most people wouldn't need to run it on eco mode, because of course they've got a 3900X, they're probably doing some gaming, maybe a little light streaming, but I'm not. And that's sort of where I can't use eco mode, because what it generally means is I'm pushing this CPU to its ragged edge. It means that I'm doing stuff like video rendering, doing large transcodes for various files. It means that I'm going ahead and editing all the time, and generally that means that I'm actually loading up all the cores a lot of the time. Now, sure, I could deal with the mid-80s, maybe 90s temps that I get, but I'm not really comfortable with doing that. So what instead I decided to do is hit the eco mode button to, drop its power limits, and of course, granted, that means it can't do as much as quickly, but it does mean that it's not going to go ahead and run hotter, and therefore shorten its lifespan, which is generally where the whole thing is. I don't want to have to go ahead and replace my CPU before I have to replace the AIO. Keeping costs down there, considering that's like a £500 CPU, or £400, or whatever it's currently going for today. I don't really want to go ahead and replace that when I'd rather have the AIO die first. So you get my predicament. Things are a little bit interesting there, so I decided to opt with eco mode, but of course that means, well, I've lost some performance, but is it really noticeable? Does it make a difference whether you're running in eco mode stock or even with PBO on in a rig like this? I guess the only thing really to do then is go ahead and, well, show you how it performs. Now, I'm not going to say too much through this, I'll just go ahead and let it roll so you can see how it performs in each thing. But I will from time to time just bring up occasional comments that I find kind of interesting. With this one here in particular, the Handbrake 265 encode. Now what this is encoding 264 footage to 265. In this case, 4K to 1080. It's not a load that I generally do, but it does happen. Generally what I will do is 4K to 4K, 264 to 265, or 1080 to 1080, 264 to 265. Now the 264 to 265 for 1080, whether it's going from 4K to 1080 or 1080 to 1080, generally speaking, is a roughly similar load in the amount of processing that it has to do. Which means that this 4K to 1080 reference load that I sort of do as a benchmark is somewhat, well, revealing of what I do often, because that's how I archive my footage. I go ahead and change it down to 265 footage to reduce, well, just the sheer file size, and often I can go ahead and reduce it by half. So in this one anyway, it achieved a time of 20 minutes and 55 seconds with an average FPS of 53. Now keep in mind that this is meant to be a slower CPU, because it's a slower CPU with 4 less cores, and of course a power limit due to the fact that it's running on eco mode. Yet despite this, of course, it did use more of the CPU than, well, my 3950X, but I think due to it being able to use more, but still keep within its power limit, it's actually ran a little bit faster. I think it ran about a minute or so faster than my 3950X does on this render. Granted, of course, it can't run multiple at once like my 3950X can, but it's an interesting thing to note that this actually manages that relatively easily. I just find that kind of incredible, to be honest. Also, we're doing a mix of 1080p and 1440p, and by that I mean I was supposed to do a load of 1440p testing, but then I sort of realised that that's going to take a while, and unfortunately I only have so much time for this video, so I decided to stick with the 1440p benchmark that we didn't have for this, which of course will be Far Cry 5. That will come along later. Also, here's one interesting thing. War Thunder. Also, let's go ahead and writing up this, well, not this script, but writing up all my notes and that lot. I generally thought I had a typo here up until I went ahead and checked my numbers. No, this does somehow achieve almost 620 FPS at medium settings for 1080p in War Thunder. That's insane! And, you know, this isn't a super high-end graphics card. This is just my GTX 1080. Hell, it's the first card I ever bought. And yet it is plowing through it. When combined with 3900X, I just find that absolutely insane, the sheer amount of performance that this little system gets like this. Also, do you remember that issue that I mentioned a while ago about GTA 5 rearing an ugly head when it comes to minimum FPS on Pass 5? That happened on this system too, so I'm starting to think that it might just be some sort of weird Pascal thing. It only seems to happen on my Pascal cards. It doesn't really seem to happen on my other Nvidia cards or even my AMD cards. It just seems to be that Pascal, it doesn't quite like this, whether it's running on a 1080 Ti or a GTX 1080. Always seems to have just a couple of frame drops. Not huge frame drops that last for seconds, but frame drops that are noticeable. So as you can see, even on eco mode, the 3900X is actually shockingly good. Like, I wouldn't have believed you if you told me that on eco mode a 3900X can perform as it just has, but as you've clearly seen, it can, and that's incredible. I mean, just looking at it, you wouldn't think, gee, that little machine there can go ahead and wipe the floor with most machines when it comes to gaming, despite the fact that it's only got a GTX 1080. It's actually mind-boggling. I mean, from 3D Mark, Cinebench, you know, to various games, it just wipes the floor. I mean, in production, it is a monster, especially with that 32 gigs of RAM. But regardless, it seems like an interesting thing. Like, these AMD chips, I'm shocked at how well they do run, and especially in a machine like this, they work an absolute charm. And as you can see, also, yeah, the machine looks kind of nice altogether. Forgive me, but there is just still something wacky about opening up Task Manager, looking over, and just seeing 24, you know, logical processors or 12 solid cores just sitting there with you know, a power limit of about 90 or so watts. This thing is using less power than my 4790K did at stock. Yet somehow it's got quite literally 3 times as many cores, you know, 3 times as many threads, boosts somewhat higher actually at times, and on top of that, it's just a monster in production. So I can't get over just how good the 3900X is when it's in eco mode. Like, even when it's at standard, it runs like a monster, but in eco mode, it's just a whole new ordeal. Like, realistically, this potentially means that with a little of finessing, you might even be able to run something like a 3900X in a far cheaper board if you can, of course, get it to run with eco mode on. Like, I'm not sure if you would be able to engage it on an A320 board, but if you could, that makes this actually somewhat viable. And if I do manage to find an A320 board, and if it does in fact support activating eco mode, I might just check that out, because it's generally shocking how good these chips are, even when you go ahead and downclock them like that, because they are still very, very, very competitive. You know, we've seen the Cinebench score, it really doesn't lose much. I think it's at most lost a few hundred points, which really doesn't count for much when we're talking about 6,000, 7,000. If you are considering an upgrade for your rig, and maybe your motherboard hasn't got the best VRM in the world, or maybe you just don't have enough cooling to really do a major chip, perhaps then, in that case, you haven't got the kind of cooling, or you've got a VRM that you don't really want to push to 150 watts or so, well, perhaps then this might be a good choice for you. It's powerful, it's sleek, in eco mode, it is incredibly power efficient. Like, granted, it still runs pretty hot. I mean, that still gets up to like 60-70 degrees, maybe a bit higher at times, but it does it flawless. And that's the thing, like, it does do it absolutely flawlessly. It only reaches like 1.1, 1.2 volts at max. And of course, because it's running on eco mode rather than a manual overclock, that also means that it still boosts to those super high speeds when you're doing single-threaded tasks such as gaming. Which means if you are a person who, like me, has got limited options for cooling, you might genuinely be able to use one of these simply because when they're on eco mode, they use so little power that even modest cooling, a simple 120mm AIO, which you might consider unfit for a chip of this caliber, actually becomes more than capable of keeping it relatively cool. Granted, mine's in a slightly funky position with the way that it's done externally, but it also has a weaker, well, not a weaker fan, but a quieter fan that doesn't pull as much air through. Which means it is getting a trade-off there, but it does it still regardless. So yeah, that's what I really think about it. It's an interesting choice. It works well, and on top of that, the 3900X, as it is anyway, is an amazing chip. I don't need to hark on about that. I'm sure a load of other people already have all over the internet, from Gamers Nexus to LTT to whoever. But if you're using it as a low power option, it's actually really, really competitive. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. It's wonderful. Still, much like the 3950X, I do recommend that at the very least you use Cryonaut as your thermal paste though, because they need it with the amount of heat that they do produce. Granted, it's very power efficient due to the way the cores are laid out and how quickly it can actually produce heat. It does make a huge difference using a high quality thermal paste, so that is one thing that I will say you do need. But yeah, brilliant chip, games like a champion. Plus, hey, who doesn't like to use a 3900X? They're cool, they're fun, as well as, to be honest, the box is actually really nice. But yeah. So that's going to be all of it for this week. I will catch you next week, where hopefully you should be doing GTX 480s in SLI in 2020. Look, I'm interested, okay? So stay tuned for that, and I will catch you all next time. So anyway, like the video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. Links to everything that was featured today in the description down below. Check out my Facebook, Patreon, and Twitch page for more content, of course, from me, as well as maybe you might want to support the channel so I can do more stuff like this. And, well, hit that subscribe button and notification bell for more content from me. And as always, this is the 117th Con, signing off. Stay safe out there, folks, and I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, take care.